Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk and to make a presentation on agroecological crop protection, focusing on the principles with two parts, one on the concept and one on the generic practices for agroecological crop protection. First of all, some reminds on the issues of crop protection in Southwest Asia. First, there is an increase and shift in the demands of in Southwest Asia countries, not only in terms of production but also in terms of quality. Of course, we have the climate change issue, and there is a wave today around the globe towards agroecology. And for crop protection, we can now say quite clearly that chemical crop protection is not sustainable at all. And of course, in addition to the side effect and to the negative effect for example, environment and mostly for human health. So it's needed today to answer, of course, to the current demands, and mainly it's in developing countries, socioeconomic issues. But also, it's needed for scientists, that we are, to anticipate the question of tomorrow. I mean, when, for example, tomorrow, pesticide will be forbidden, for example, I don't know when, maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, maybe next century, we don't know. But we can imagine that one day pesticide will be forbidden in the different countries. We have to anticipate the answer, and for that, we have to take into account the main issue, which is an ecological issue to get a sustainable agroecosystem, of course, in addition to the classical issue, which are socioeconomic, environmental, and also health. Just a slide to stress the limits of agrochemistry in terms of efficacy, of cost, of impact, negative impacts. And with something which is now clear for everybody, for every partner, every actor, that the agroecosystem on agrochemical basis is not ecologically sustainable. Maybe we can find some advantage of pesticide, but they are maybe psychological, for example. I met some farmers, they say that if they spray, they can sleep easily, because they think they did their job. So it's like a pesticide is an addiction. A word on the cost of pesticides. Some recent studies are showing that the cost of pesticide is more important than the benefits that they can provide. Here it's, for example, a study on the utilization of pesticides in the US for some decades. This is more serious. United Nations, it was in 2017, pesticides are not considered today not only as right to food, but also as a human rights, because now it's recognized that pesticides are killing people. And in this report, for example, by the special rapporteur of the human right in the UN, they said, for example, that we have some data, such as 200,000 people killed by pesticide around the world each year. Here it's another very recent, in a national newspaper, French one, called The Magic World of Pesticide. And it's a paper where the European Union is questioning about the integrity and the fiability of different methods used to evaluate the impact of pesticide on environment, of course, on human health. And the hypothesis of a writer of a paper is that it's quite normal because most of this method has been designed and implemented by the chemical actors. So now what we have to do? We have the main classical, I can say classical issues of what we call sustainable development, social, environmental and economic. We can add two issues more. The first one is health, which is very important in some societies, in some countries. And we can add also another one, which is different than environmental. It's ecological issues. And if we have the agroecology entry, of course, this approach focus on ecological issue and not directly on the other issues. But of course, this approach has generally positive consequences, positive effects on the other issues. For example, if we take the aim, the purpose of reducing pesticides, agroecology is an approach that can answer quite significantly to this issue. And I have to also to stress that health issue is very important, and maybe it's this issue which is going to move the society, the consumers, the different actors, and also the farmers. A word on what is agroecology. I go very quickly because I think most of you know this term. Agroecology has a lot of definitions, but we retain only three main things. The first one is a set of practices, including, for example, what we call conservation agriculture. The second one is a social movement for development, mostly in developing countries, and it was born in South America. And the third definition of agroecology is a scientific approach, set of disciplines, and it's this definition that I retain for me. But of course, it can be declined not only for science but also to the different actors, for farmers, for technicians, for extenders, and so on. In this book, recently edited, entitled Agroecological Crop Protection, you have a chapter which is devoted to the principles of agroecological protection. I think it will be easy for you to go in this book and to see what is written on this topic. A definition of agroecology by Glissman, the declension of a principle of ecology to agronomy. You see, it's very simple. By Dalgard et al. In 2003, the study of interaction between plants, animal, human, and environment in agroecosystems. You have the hard agroecology and soft agroecology, depending if you consider or not, for example, the human sciences. But I would like to stress on a very old definition. It's maybe, yes, it's more than 50 years ago now, by an agronomist of INRA, which is a national research institute in France. This agronomist is called Hénin. He is now dead, but he said 50 years ago that agronomy is ecology applied to the production of cultivated plant communities and to the agricultural land management. And so you can consider that it's something which is very, very close of the approach of agroecology today. This diagram is not so complicated, is explaining where agroecological crop protection is coming from. on your left, you have got all the agronomic characteristic, and on your right, you have the same thing for ecology. And of course, agroecology is in the middle. It's a set of disciplines, a scientific approach. And if we declench this scientific approach to crop protection, we get agroecological crop protection. And for example, just an example, you have in ecology, you have, for example, a scientific discipline which is called conservation biology. And in agronomy, you can consider that conservation biological control is quite the parallel disciplines than conservation biology in ecology. And I would like also to stress that, for example, we can include in this approach biodiversity. We can include also all the knowledge and techniques of IPM, integrated pest management. And I would like also to stress that it's very consistent with the approach of conservation agriculture, and sometimes with organic agriculture. What are the fields of agroecology? There is a definition by FAO and some others, but we can consider, beside agroforestry, organic agriculture, conservation agriculture, SRI for rice, and permaculture, VSA for several systems, mainly in Southeast Asia. We can consider that the declension of agroecology for crop protection is exactly agroecological crop protection. A word on the evolution of different approaches in crop protection. With, as you can see, that agrochemistry and agroecology are quite similar. They are the same age, but agrochemistry was developed during 1 century, and agroecology has a disruption for a long time, and it was developed by in the 80s. And of course, the declension in crop protection, you can see that IPM was very well following agrochemistry, and agroecological crop protection is quite recent because it was born after the 2000s. And it's why, it's a reason why agroecological crop protection is an approach that must be explained, trained, teaching and so on, and it's necessary to justify and to argument and to explain what agroecological crop protection is now, and it's why, for example, you have got a book called Agroecological Crop Protection, and it's why also, of course, why this scientist school is devoted on agroecological crop protection. So now, to say exactly what is agroecological protection in the principles, we have two main axes, which are the basis of the ecological sustainability of an agroecosystems. The first axe is biodiversity, and the second axis is soil health. And as you can see now, we can consider that crop protection is community management. We are in ecology. We are talking about communities, and it's not, of course, as before, pesticide communities. And in this approach, it's quite compatible and coherent with other agroecological approaches, conservation agriculture or organic agriculture. On this slide, you can see that we are talking mostly of community management for vegetal communities, with for the cultivated plant or the cultivated plants, but also the uncultivated plants, spontaneous, or that we insert in the agroecosystems. And community management also with animal communities, of course, with the pests, but also with the natural enemies, the beneficials, and other trophic groups, such as pollinators, which are quite known, but also other trophic groups which are less known, such as detritivore, for example. And of course, amongst these communities management, it's also the aim is to optimize the interaction between all these communities. And it's exactly the same thing in the soil. Crop protection for agroecology is now also soil management in terms of interaction, in terms of the three parts, chemical, structural, physical, and biological, mostly management of the communities in the soil. There are three pillars in the fields which are linked. The first of pillar is sanitation, prophylaxis, preventive measures. The second one is center of gravity, mostly for animal pests, and it's conservation biological control. And the third one is habitat management. We can call that habitat manipulation, insertion of biodiversity in the agroecosystems. Here you have the declension of these principles in the field or in the practices. But first of all, I have to stress that the first measure we have to take into account are regulatory measures. It's very important to respect the law, to respect this regulation. After that, the main step, the first one, and not the last one, is preventive measure. And it means, for example, to do all that we can do before having curative measure. Of course, after doing that, if we need to have curative measure, we can apply some of them, including chemicals, but only as a last resort, and with the lower effects on biodiversity and with low side effects, low negative effects. And as you can see in this slide, there are two main key words which are order in the declension and the application, the implementation of these practices in the field. And of course, the second one is ecology. A word on conservation biological control, which is the center of gravity of agroecological crop protection. It's not only to insert, for example, vegetal communities or vegetal biodiversity in or around the ecosystem. It's also to have consistent practices before or and after. For example, before it could be, and it must be, to suppress or to highly reduce the pressure of pesticides. And after, the third phase is to have safe cultural practices with that we did for insertion of biodiversity for conservation biological control. This slide just want to show that we have a lot of strategies for conservation biological control, a lot of tactics, of practices to implement in the field by the farmer. So it's tools that there are tools that we can use concretely in the field. This slide summarizes the agroecological protection approach in 7 points. The first one is to remind that agroecological crop protection is only the declension of the scientific concept of agroecology in crop protection. It's based on two main axes, biodiversity and soil health. The priority is given to the preventive measures. Curative measures are considered only as a last resort. We have three main pillars: preventive measures, such as sanitation, for example, conservation biological control, and habitat management. And we have to change the scales in terms of space, in terms of time. I have no time to discuss that, but we can do that on the coffee break if you want. And also for the criteria for the farmers. These criteria could be socio, economic, but also environmental, but also ecological criteria, such as the abundance, for example, or the richness of the biodiversity in the agroecosystems. And this approach it's very global. It's a systemic one, participative one with all the actors. It's impossible to have such an approach alone, only with an actor. So it's participative and collective, and with new criteria. So we can consider that agroecological crop protection is a new paradigm, as Philippe said before, maybe to replace IPM paradigm, which was a paradigm for most than half of a century. It implies, it has some consequences. For example, we need an evolution in the perimeter and the contents of a research. And it's very important for us. We are scientists and we have to take that into account. We cannot do the same research than before in the previous decades. And we have also to integrate something that we didn't know very well during the last decade. It's to integrate the knowledge of farmers, to take into account not only the scientific knowledge, but also the empiric knowledge of farmers. And the last point, very important to have in mind, is to know that it's necessary to have a continuum between the partners, for example, from research to farmers via experimentation, training, teaching, extension, policies, and so on. So, two main words: order in the declension in the field, and ecology. I would like also to say that agroecological crop protection is quite consistent between concept, the definitions, the practices, and the policies. Of course, we are at the beginning of this new approach, but the definition of agroecological crop protection is clear. It is the concept of crop protection based on ecological reasoning for the sustainable functioning of agroecosystems. We have a clear description for agroecological crop protection practices, as you can see on this slide. We have a clear description of the pillars. We have a clear description of the implementation in the field, and so on. So it's important to stress that we have, with this approach, if we want to answer to the ecological issue at the global planet, but also at the local context, which is very consistent, because between what we say and what we need in the facts. So it's time now for us to change and to move from agrochemistry to agroecology, to take the right way, because we have several ways. One way is to continue in agroecology. I think it's not the good one, but maybe some actors can take this way, and to quite urgently answer to the ecological issue. Maybe we can. Our job could be to anticipate and to prepare the future ban of pesticides. So it's a long way. It's not easy, but the sooner we start, the sooner we will get result. We have a lot of difficulties on this road, of course, not only technical, but also between actors, social issues, and so on. Here is quite a generic methodological approach and systemic and collective approach for agroecological crop protection in the field. We don't do that in one day. It needs time. For example, in Réunion Island, our experiences are based on more than 10 years, with three main phases. The first phase consists to share collectively with all the actors to make a diagnosis of the situation, and if all the actors want to co-design a project, a way, a direction, and such as, for example, a research and development project. After we have to look for, of course, for funds to implement that. The second, and that this phase takes time. In Réunion Island, it took 2 or 3 years, so it's quite long. We have not to start directly by implementing something in the field. The second phase is the implementation of such a research and development project in the field by farmers. Not in the station, not in an experimental station, not in a research field, but directly at the producer level. And then to assess and to make an evaluation of the result, technical, social, economical, ecological, of these practices. And the fifth one, the third one, if the results are quite good, it could be, as it was the case in Réunion Island, a training phase, extension phase, with a role very important of extenders, of trainers, of teachers, and of course of policy makers. And globally, if you see at these 3 phases, you can see that research activities, not only for cognitive fields, I mean to acquire new knowledge in a field, but also for integrative research, I mean to use this knowledge to answer to the development question, for example. These research activities take place at each phase, and it's very important. So the strategy in the field, we can stress that we give priority to preventive measures, not only in the facts, but also not only to say, but also in the needs, to improve biodiversity, to improve, of course, soil health, and to consider conservation biological control as the center of gravity of this approach. Here is that just to finish an example of implementation of different practices in the experiences of agroecological crop protection in Réunion Island. So as you can see, it will be very consistent with the principles. The first thing is to suppress or to highly reduce pesticides, and mainly insecticide and herbicides. And also, as a preventive measure, to implement some techniques such as, for example, sanitation, but also, for example, to use resistant or adapted varieties, and so on. Then, as you can see on the slide, we have some practices, agroecological practices, that include biodiversity in the agroecosystem, such as permanent vegetal cover, traplands, flower strips, refuge plants, and so on. So, as you can see, for now, it's these practices contribute to conservation biological control. After that, we have to take care of the health of the soil. Not after that, but we have also to take care of the management of the soil. So, of course, with the management of mineral fertilizer, taking into account the needs of the plant, but mostly to take into account the health of the soil. So we promote the use of organic matter, for example, for the soil. We can also, as you can see on this slide, use some techniques which are used, for example, in IPM, and which are very compatible, consistent with this approach, but not at the beginning, as you can see. And to finish, as the ultimate line, we can consider the curative measures. And as you can see, the 2 main words, order and ecology, are still investable. And we did that for all the crops in Réunion Island, in cucurbits and in fruit crops. And now for most of the farmers, maybe we could say that if we can consider that observation monitoring is a practice, it could be now the most important practice, but not to get to monitor in order to have curative measures, but mostly to describe, to understand, and now farmers are able, some farmers are able to do that. And I have to remind that in the curative measure, we have, of course, chemical measure, but we have other curative measure than chemicals ones. And if we take chemical ones at the last resort, we will take them with the lowest impact on the biological regulations. So we have also to take care of different kind of agroecosystem. As you can see here, it's an agrosystem in France, in the north of France, with cereal, with large plots. As you can see, you have only one species in terms of biodiversity, and you have quite a very degraded soil in this slide. So we have to adopt now an ecological and ordered approach. You have some support for that, where the knowledge is more and more. You have books, of course the new one, but another one 10 years ago, which was edited 10 years ago, which is entitled Crop Protection from Agrochemistry to Agroecology. We will discuss about the agroecological crop protection book with 5 chapters. We have also developed with INRA, INRA developed with some partners, and Sierra is a partner, a MOOC, e-learning module on agroecological crop protection called Gascon. You have the internet address. It's soon available. In Southeast Asia, we have also organized some meetings, such as workshops in Myanmar, in Vietnam, as you can see on this slide. This one was held in February, last February, one month ago, in Italy, in Volterra, on agroecological crop protection, with participants from 10 countries. Here is a slide of current agroecological crop protection international scientist school held in Can Tho in southern Vietnam. So as you can see, it needs a lot of efforts for having participative experiences. So I thank you very much for your attention to this presentation.